The woman in seat 3A, Brenda Kensington, hadn't even finished her complimentary pre-flight water before she decided my 2-year-old son didn't belong near her. And honestly, what happened next? Somewhere over the Rocky Mountains is something the other 147 passengers on that flight will probably never forget. Let me take you back to how this whole thing started. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, and my name is Arthur Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, a single dad. And I had just spent 11 days in Portland helping my mother recover from hip replacement surgery. My son Caleb had been an absolute trooper the entire trip. Sleeping in a strange pack-hand play, eating whatever was available, charming every single nurse on the 3rd floor of Providence Medical. The kid was a saint. We were flying home to Cedar Ridge, and because my mother, bless her heart, had used her frequent flyer miles to book us a proper seat up front, Caleb and I were settled into row 3, seats B and C, first class. A first for both of us, honestly. I'd packed his little dinosaur backpack with crayons, a juice box, some goldfish crackers, and his worn-out stuffed elephant named Gerald. I was prepared. I was organized. I was ready. What I was not ready for was Brenda Kensington in 3A. She boarded about 4 minutes after us, mid-60s, I'd guess, wearing a cream-colored blazer, and carrying one of those hard-shell designer bags that cost more than my car payment. She took one look at Caleb, who was quietly stacking 2 small Duplo blocks on the tray table, and her entire face shifted, like a cloud passing over the sun. She didn't say anything at first, just arranged herself in her seat with great ceremony, pulled out a silk eye mask, and set it on her armrest like a little flag of personal sovereignty. I smiled at her. She did not smile back. Caleb, being 2 and completely unaware of social hostility, looked up at her and said, "Hi," in that big, open way toddlers do, like every stranger is a potential best friend. She looked at him the way you'd look at a spider on your bathroom wall. I let it go. People have bad mornings. People have personal space preferences. I get it. But then the flight attendant, a kind young man named Marcus, according to his name tag, came by to offer pre-departure drinks. And that's when Brenda decided it was time to speak up. "Excuse me," she said to Marcus, not quietly. "Is there any policy about," she gestured vaguely at Caleb, "this being in first class?" Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "The child," she said, like the word tasted bitter. "I paid for a premium experience. I specifically chose a morning flight because they tend to be quieter. Is there another section where—" "He's a ticketed passenger," I said. Calm even. My voice didn't shake, which honestly surprised me. She turned to look at me fully for the first time. "I'm sure he is, sweetheart. I'm simply asking whether there's a family section toward the back where this would be more appropriate. Sweetheart." 34 years old, a mortgage, a master's degree, and she called me sweetheart. Marcus handled it beautifully, I'll give him that. He straightened up, smiled with practiced patience, and told her that all ticketed passengers were equally welcome in their assigned seats, and he'd be happy to help her with anything she actually needed. She did not like that answer. For the next 20 minutes, as the rest of the passengers boarded, as the gate door closed, as the safety demonstration played, she made her displeasure known in that particular way some people have mastered. Not loud enough to be called a scene, but just audible enough to poison the air around her. Little sighs, little comments to no one. Some of us have early meetings. You'd think they'd consider other passengers. Caleb, for his part, had moved on from the Duplo blocks and was now carefully feeding Gerald the elephant a pretend cracker. And then the cabin door sealed. The plane began to push back from the gate. That's when Brenda turned to me one final time. And what she said next was the thing that changed everything. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something expensive and sharp. And she said in a low, clipped voice, "I want you to know that I will be speaking to someone in charge the moment we land. This is completely unacceptable, and I intend to make sure the airline hears about it." I just looked at her. "You're welcome to do that," I said quietly, and I turned back to Caleb, who had fallen asleep against my arm somewhere during the taxi to the runway. Gerald the elephant tucked under his chin, lips slightly parted. The most peaceful little face you've ever seen in your life. She wanted a fight. I didn't give her one. And somehow, I think that made her even angrier. The first hour of the flight was quiet. Genuinely quiet. Caleb slept through takeoff, which, if you're a parent, you know, is basically a miracle on the level of a solar eclipse. I read my book. I drank my coffee. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 11 days. She had her eye mask on and her noise-canceling headphones in place. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, we'd made it through the worst of it. I should have known better. Somewhere over Nevada, Caleb woke up. Not crying, not fussing, just awake. The way toddlers sometimes are, like a light switch flipping on. He looked around, blinked, spotted the window across the aisle, and actually whispered, "Dada." Clouds, a woman in 5B, who'd been watching the whole situation since boarding, looked over and mouthed, "He's adorable," at me. I mouthed back, "Thank you." That small kindness meant more than she probably knew. But Brenda had pushed up her eye mask. And the moment Caleb shifted in his seat and accidentally knocked his juice box closed, thankfully onto the floor between our rows, she exhaled like a woman who had been personally wronged by the universe. "Marcus." She didn't raise her hand, just said his name, like a woman accustomed to being heard. Marcus appeared from the galley. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to speak with the head flight attendant, please." A pause. "And if possible, the captain." Now, here's the thing about that request. On most flights, on most days, a passenger asking to speak with the captain mid-flight about a toddler would go exactly nowhere. Marcus would have nodded politely, promised to pass along her concerns, and gone back to the galley to quietly tell his colleagues about the woman in 3A. That's what should have happened. Except, and this is the twist I genuinely did not see coming, the captain on our flight that morning was a woman named Captain Renee Holt. I only know her name because of what happened next. I only know who she was because the gentleman in seat 2A, a quiet, silver-haired man who had been reading a paperback thriller the entire flight, lowered his book, turned slightly toward Brenda, and said in a very calm voice, "You might want to reconsider that request." Brenda blinked at him. "Excuse me?" He just smiled, patient, almost amused, and went back to his book. She made the request anyway. Of course she did. Marcus disappeared toward the cockpit. Few minutes passed. The cabin hummed along. Caleb was drawing a purple scribble in his coloring book and narrating it softly to Gerald. "That's a dragon, Gerald. He's nice." The woman in 5B was pretending to read a magazine, but very clearly watching everything. The couple in 4A and 4B had both quietly removed their headphones. Even the businessman in 1B, who had barely looked up from his laptop the entire flight, had gone still. People knew something was happening. They just didn't know what yet. And then the small speaker above our heads clicked on. That little ding, the one that usually means turbulence ahead, or a reminder to fasten your seatbelts. And then a voice, steady and warm, and carrying just the faintest note of something that was not quite amusement, but was close to it. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Holt. I don't normally make mid-flight announcements of a personal nature, but I've been made aware of a situation in the first-class cabin that I'd like to address directly." The businessman's laptop screen went dark. The woman in 5B set her magazine completely down, and Brenda, for the first time since she'd boarded, went absolutely, perfectly still. "It has come to my attention that one of our passengers has expressed discomfort sharing the first-class cabin with a young child and his father. I want to take a moment to be very clear about something." The pause that followed was no more than 3 seconds long. It felt like 10 minutes. Every passenger on this aircraft, regardless of age, regardless of whether they are 2 years old or 92 years old, has equal right to their ticketed seat. That is not a guideline. That is not a suggestion. That is the policy of this airline. And it is a policy I personally stand behind without reservation. You could have heard a pin drop at 37,000 feet. I also want to say this directly to the father in row 3. You are doing a wonderful job. Fly with us again soon. The speaker clicked off, and for about 2 full seconds, the entire first-class cabin was completely, utterly silent. Then the woman in 5B started clapping. Not sarcastically, not performatively, just clapping. The honest kind, the kind that starts from somewhere real. The couple in 4A and 4B joined in immediately. The businessman in 1B closed his laptop and added his hands to it. Even the silver-haired gentleman in 2A, the one who had warned her so quietly, set down his thriller and applauded with the calm satisfaction of a man who had known exactly how this would go. Marcus, standing at the edge of the galley, was smiling so wide he seemed to be trying to contain it professionally and losing the battle. I had my hand over my mouth. Caleb looked up from his coloring book, completely bewildered by the sudden noise, and did what 2-year-olds do when they don't understand something but sense it's positive. He started clapping too. Big, enthusiastic, slightly off-rhythm toddler clapping, looking around at everyone like he'd just been included in something wonderful. Which, in a way, he had. And Brenda, she didn't explode. She didn't make a scene. She didn't demand to be reseated or call for Marcus or announce that she'd be writing a very strongly worded letter. Though I suspect she probably did write one eventually, in the privacy of her own home, to no great effect. What she did was something I actually didn't expect. She reached up, slowly, and pulled her eye mask back down over her eyes. She put her headphones back on, and she didn't say another single word for the remaining hour and 40 minutes of that flight. Not one word. There's a particular kind of silence that's different from peaceful quiet. It's the silence of someone who knows that they have run out of runway. That the audience they were performing for has turned, completely and without apology, in the other direction. That was the silence of seat 3A. About 20 minutes before we landed in Cedar Ridge, Marcus came by with a small tray. On it were 2 items: a little cup of apple juice for Caleb and a handwritten note on airline stationery. I still have that note, tucked inside the front cover of the book I was reading that day. It said, "Captain Holt asked me to pass this along. Traveling with a little one takes courage and grace. You had both today. Safe travels, Arthur. R.H." I read it twice, then I folded it carefully, slid it into my book, and looked out the window, at the first pale edges of the Carolinas coming into view below us. Caleb had fallen asleep again. Gerald the elephant was on the floor. I picked him up, tucked him back under my son's arm, and just sat there for a moment, being quietly, unexpectedly grateful. We landed in Cedar Ridge at 11:47 in the morning. Smooth touchdown, autumn sunshine on the tarmac. That particular relief that settles into your shoulders when a journey is finally fully done. Brenda was first off the plane, as I imagine she always was everywhere she went. She moved through the jet bridge without looking back, her hard-shell bag rolling smartly behind her, her cream blazer still perfectly pressed. She didn't acknowledge me as she passed. I didn't expect her to. As the rest of us gathered our things and shuffled into the aisle, the silver-haired man from 2A paused beside my row. He looked at Caleb, still drowsy, hair mussed Gerald hanging from one hand. And then he looked at me, and he said simply, "Fine boy. Fine flight." Then he walked off the plane. I've thought about that morning a lot since then. Not because it was dramatic. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't. Nobody was hurt. Nothing terrible happened. A woman was rude, a pilot was decent, and the world kept spinning at the usual speed. But here's what I keep coming back to. Kindness, when it comes from a position of real authority, lands differently. Captain Renee Holt didn't have to say a word. She could have let Marcus handle it, let it dissolve into the ordinary friction of air travel, and move on. She was a busy woman, flying a plane carrying 149 people through the sky. She chose to say something anyway, and because she did, my son, who will never remember any of this, who was too young and too busy feeding his elephant pretend crackers, was on a flight where every adult around him decided, in one quiet collective moment, that he belonged there, that he was welcome. Sometimes that's all any of us really need to hear. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who could use a reminder that decency still shows up when you least expect it, even at 37,000 feet. Please subscribe to HOA Conflicts